Hello, I want to welcome you to this brief and important lecture on racism and housing. This is not a civil rights lecture. Rather, this lecture focuses on the post-war population boom from the baby boomers, the government-sponsored housing solutions, and the multiple racist roadblocks placed before people of color in their search for post-war housing. Answer, and here's the answer, very important. Although many whites benefited from the, quote, greatest wealth giveaway since the 19th century, end quote, according to Princeton professor Dalton Conley, it was the GI Bill, deed restrictions, homeowner associations, redlining, FHA loans, federal, state, and local governments, and private banks all provided significant roadblocks that made it difficult for people of color to purchase a home in the U.S. post-war boom. So when men and women returned from World War II, making babies became a natural reaction. Although the baby boom actually started during the war, by 1946, a baby was born every 10 seconds. And with a peak of 4.3 million U.S. births in 1957, from 1954 to 1964, 4 million babies were born every year. And the baby boomer generation exploded. And they'll need a place to stay. In California, just in California, since the start of World War II, all the way to 1999, the state added 1,300 residents every day, according to Fulton and Sigley. Where will they all live? U.S. veterans were especially pressed to find affordable housing after the war. Around 850,000 veterans moved to California in the immediate post-war era. Where will they live after they have left home for many, many years? In this image, Staff Sergeant Tom Winfield and his wife couldn't find a place in crowded Santa Monica. Try Venice, maybe Brentwood. Veteran groups protested and advocated for affordable housing, as they did in this photograph in MacArthur Park, 1947, just west of downtown Los Angeles. And from 1940 to 1970, 7 million people were added to the County of Angels. Now, Quonset housing became a very popular, temporary, and affordable housing solutions throughout the United States. Wherever a housing crisis appeared, and which was occurred in basically most major U.S. cities. Here's temporary emergency Quonset housing in San Pedro in 1946. More emergency housing in East LA with City Hall in the background. Quonset villas in Michoacan, Michigan. Now, the GI Bill. The GI Bill was created under the Democratic administration as a way to reward the 16 million servicemen and women whose average time away from home was about 2.5 years. The bill provided unemployment pay, college and vocational tuition, money to eat and live on, loans for homes, farms, and money to start a business. It was and is a great way for veterans to work themselves back into civilian lives. Of the more than 15 million eligible veterans, about 50% utilized the educational benefits. 2.2 million attended college, including graduate school. This includes several professors of mine and notable persons such as Ruben Salazar, Howard Zinn, Clint Eastwood, Johnny Carson, Medgar Evers, and many more. 3.5 million enrolled in other educational systems. 1.4 million maximized job trainings, and 700,000 vets sought agricultural training. It was the GI Bill that was crucial for home ownership, especially for vets. Many vets would not be homeowners without federal government money. In fact, 42% of all World War II vets became homeowners by 1956, while less than 34% of non-vets owned homes. For veterans of color, home ownership was even less. While the GI Bill worked out great for many white men, women and people of color fared much worse. Male veterans received significantly more money than female veterans, and black veterans received even less. For example, veterans Anne Bosanko and Ken Green got married in 1946. Congratulations. Their GI stipends totaled about $145 a month. It was about $90 for him and only $55 for her, or 61% of what he made. Even today, full-time working women only make about 81 cents for every dollar that a man makes, and Latinos only make about 55 cents for every dollar. 39% of black soldiers and only 21% of white soldiers were dishonorably discharged from service. What does that mean? That means black veterans who served were disproportionately forbidden to receive GI benefits. Blacks were also banned from many veterans groups, according to Liz Cohen. In 1947, out of 100,000 blacks eligible for college under the GI Bill, only about 20,000 were admitted to college. Only 15,000 found a school, and 70% of these attended a black college or university. In fact, blacks were turned away from schools twice the rate of veterans. That same year, 53% of all married black veterans, compared to only 39% of whites, were living doubled up with relatives in trailers or rented small rooms. In the New York, New Jersey, Northeast New Jersey area, out of 449,000 mortgage properties, only 1.7% belonged to non-whites. Only 1.7% of these properties went to non-whites. I'm sure that was just an accident. In fact, non-whites only own 2.1% of properties with conventional first mortgages, only 2.1%, only 0.9% of FHA mortgages, only 0.1% of VA mortgages. This is all still in the New York, Northeast, New Jersey area, according to Liz Cohen. You cannot make up these freaking numbers. Blacks and people of color were purposely being left out of the American dream. Now, mostly left to fend for themselves, blacks organized and learned about their GI Bill in order to maximize the benefits they earned, but were denied. In one specific example, a black veteran from Texas sought help from the NAACP and complained, quote, "All the districts that we black veterans may choose to live in have been ruled out. Under the present setup, no Negro veteran is eligible for a loan." In another example of racism in housing, Ebony Magazine surveyed 13 Mississippi cities and concluded in 1947, black vets received only 2 of the 3,229 loans that the VA guaranteed. Only 2 out of 3,229. One of the few places blacks could turn to was public charities, like the Salvation Army, the Goodwill Mission, the Red Cross, and of course, the NAACP, who has helped black Americans since 1909. They organized and fought different levels of racism at Jim Crow restaurants, bars, skating rinks, and swimming pools, and of course, housing segregation. For example, within the city of Newark, 2,113 white families were housed in the city's 7 low-income projects. Only 623 black families were housed there, compared to the 2,113 white families. And 4 of those housing projects were whites only. The tools of racial segregation. Now, this is very important. This gets us to an important place of this lecture, where several important racism and housing themes are discussed. Please take careful notes. And here we go. 1. Restricted covenants or deed restrictions. What are deed restrictions? Well, deed restrictions restrict people from certain activities at homes. But most famously, one of those restrictions can be people. Deed restrictions can ban people of color from purchasing and or renting homes in certain communities. And they were very popular throughout the greatest and freest country in the world. Here's a photo that reads, "This tract is exclusive and restricted." It was first published in the California Eagle in 1950, which is an African American newspaper. This term, exclusive and restrictive, was an invitation to white veterans from the builders of the Sun-Kissed Gardens project in southeast Los Angeles. It clearly stated that black people or vets were not welcome. Black people or even black vets were not welcome by the community or private developers in southeast Los Angeles. Here's some more welcoming signs for American of color. A little more racism. And a little more. Be sure, this type of housing racism was completely legal in the greatest country on earth. In 1919, the Supreme Court ruled in Los Angeles Investment Company versus Gary. The ruling clarified that people of color could legally purchase a home in any community they wanted. But legally, they could not live in their homes. They could buy the home, but they couldn't live in the home. And that's racist housing in America. And it wasn't ended until 1948. Shelley v. Kramer, it ended racial restricted covenants by the United States Supreme Court. Second, homeowners associations. Similar to restricted covenants, homeowner associations made rules on who could live in a neighborhood. And guess who they left out? It was no secret. Homeowner associations banned hardworking people of color. Some LA examples include the Los Feliz Improvement Association and the University District Property Owners Association. Racist. This type of racism by homeowner association was so popular, it was even a political platform. That means people ran for political office on racist ideals in the greatest and freest country on earth. It's probably difficult for you to understand today in 2021 that Americans were so racist it became politicized. Candidates in the past actually ran on racism and people voted for racist candidates. I'm so glad that's hard to imagine today and that this doesn't happen anymore. Racist. Third, and this one is extremely important, redlining. Redlining was a federal government program, but was operated by local and state governments. Very important here, the Federal Housing Administration, FHA, and the Homeowners Loan Corporation, HOLC, were government loan programs. While the program worked for white families, it was disastrous for people of color. The government judged or, quote, redlined communities, declaring homogeneous white neighborhoods financially safe and communities of color a bad place and a significant risk. Kukui. As such, they received less money. It was the whites who got government welfare, not blacks or other people of color, because it was racist. In redlining, the government rated communities good and bad and calculated the risk in lending money to certain neighborhoods. The higher the rating, the better the opportunity to receive a loan. The lower the rating, the lower the chance for loan approval. Out of the 4-grade rating system, the highest being A or green, then B and C, and the last rating was D or red, areas with people of color were constantly diagnosed as hazardous, earning a D or barely a C. As a result, it was virtually impossible to receive a home loan and invest those monies in your community if you lived in a, quote, hazardous area such as Oakland, East LA, and the San Francisco Mission District. It was also a racist. Federal investigators evaluated 239 regions for risk. I need you to pay attention to this one. communities with a mere 1 or 2 black families in the community were deemed ipso facto financial risk by the federal government. That means it's as a matter of fact. And therefore, because 1 or 2 black families were there, they were not eligible for low-cost home loans. That means having people of color in a neighborhood home was enough to have your entire neighborhood deemed, quote, hazardous, end quote. In the eyes of the federal government, people of color were literally hazardous in terms of post-war housing loans. Government appraisal maps color these communities red, hence the origin of the term redlining. The U.S. government subsidized racism and white flight, or white people fleeing inner cities that were getting too dark for their taste. The government made it much more difficult to stay in mixed race communities, although whites had more options. Places like Boyle Heights and Oakland had the lowest possible ranking, principally because it was multiracial. Quote, so if you're a returning serviceman, Jewish, trying to start a family, it is likely to cost you more money to purchase a house in Boyle Heights, even the same house as the San Fernando Valley, because the San Fernando Valley is mostly white, is given the best rating, green. So actually, to get a new mortgage is cheaper out in this new area that's seen as homogeneous and not risky as opposed to communities of color, says USC professor George Sanchez. And let me please clarify the racist here. It is cheaper to buy a home if you are white and buy a home in a white community. It costs you less money. It costs more money to be black or Latino or a person of color, and it costs less money to be white. To be white means you live in a system with great benefits. In this case, guaranteed low interest home loans unavailable to many communities of color. Remember, we're talking about the 40s and 50s, 60s, not present era. Everything is picture perfect, and there is no longer racism in the greatest, freest country on earth. Now, we've already talked about some results. Now, let's finalize this lecture and talk about significant long-term results. From 1934 to 1968, 98% of the federal home loans went to white families. Only 2% went to black families. Let's say that again. The federal government, for decades, spent $120 billion on home loans. 98% went to whites. This is racism par excellence. You can't make this stuff up. This is racism really at its worst. Unless you're white, it's at its best. There are substantial benefits. Moreover, whites were giving very low interest rates as little as 5%, and under circumstances even lower than that, with as much as 30 years to pay back the loan. White families that appeared to pay $15,000 for a home actually only paid $500 and borrowed the rest from the government. These homes that only cost a few $1,000s are now worth $500,000 to millions of dollars today. What a tremendous advantage to be white from the 1930s to the 1970s. Not today, everything's perfect. Everything's equitable now. These low interest federal loans allowed millions of white Americans to own a home for the first time and then pass those homes down through generations. Such racism stopped black families from getting billions of dollars of housing welfare that whites received. And more importantly, no homes equals no wealth and no equity. And blacks and other people of color could not pass down this type of wealth. Even today, African American incomes are only about 60% of white incomes. But African American wealth is only 5% of white wealth. It's a huge difference. And what's the difference? It's the home equity. Most middle-class families gain their wealth from their homes, not by working. So the enormous difference between a 60% income ratio and a 5% wealth ratio is almost entirely attributable to federal housing policy implemented through the 20th century, according to Richard Rothstein's Color of Law. The effects of racism are crystal clear. Out of the $120 billion in government-backed home loans, less than 2% went to non-whites in Northern California between World War II and 1960. Of 350,000 federally guaranteed new home loans, less than 100 went to black families, or 0.0002%. Blacks were being left out of the American dream. Many other forms of racist housing existed. One of the most obvious was the building of a wall between a white and black communities. Specifically in Detroit, the FHA would not proceed with housing unless the developer built a 6-foot-high cement wall separating black community from the white community. Other walls existed that separated blacks from whites. Again, I am glad to live in a country where we no longer separate people from walls or separate children. Quickly, the 1949 Housing Act actually made things worse, because the real result was a slum clearance, which mostly impacted lower income minority neighborhoods because it destroyed neighborhoods. More than 300,000 families were displaced. The bill had some good intention, but only provided federal housing for destruction of communities and new construction. So racial housing segregation in the U.S. was so perfected, even by the 1990s, nearly 90% of suburban whites lived in segregated communities. Specifically, 90% of suburban whites lived in communities with a non-white population of less than 1%. Less than 1%. In one Long Island community, out of 53,000 people, only 127 residents were black, according to Eric Foner. Now, as we wrap up this lecture, let's do this quickly. Let's talk about white flight. White families fleeing to these newly built suburban homes with government welfare. White people of color mostly stayed in defunded inner cities lined with lousy older housing, unable to acquire other loans. And the post-war white flight was very effective. From 1947 to 53, the suburban population increased 43%, while the general population only increased by 11%. By the 1950s, the 20 largest metropolitan areas, the cities only grew by 1%, while the suburbs grew by 45%. Suburbanization grew at a rate that was 10 times faster than central cities, from 3.51 to 76.6 million from 1950 to 1970. In New York City, the white population decreased by 7%. The black population increased by 46%. Chicago's white population decreased by 13%. The black population rose by 65%. Philadelphia's white population decreased by 13%, as the black population rose by 41% in the 1950s. And some of the best examples of this suburban racism are Levittown, a large planned neighborhood only for white people. Quote, Levittown homes must not be used or occupied by any person other than members of the Caucasian race, according to Levittown lease. They're racist. They didn't want black people. Lakewood, again, which is a whole other lecture. We're going to wrap this lecture up right now. Lakewood also exemplifies racist suburban values in the United States. Blacks were not even allowed to apply for one of these new suburban homes. The racism was real in Southern California and the Lakewood community. Lakewood represented itself as a 100% American family community, but without blacks. In fact, the land used to have restricted covenants against blacks, Mexicans, and Jews. Whew, and that's it. All right, we need to end this. I won't go into more racism of how Los Angeles was designed as the white spot of America, or that Lakewood was designed as a white spot of Lakewood. We are done here. Okay, have a great day. Have a non-racist day. Thank you for joining us.